Where do we want to start with this? Are we going to accept that most people listening will be somewhat familiar with Lockerbie? Or do you want to just do and it's not a very complicated initial story.
No, I don't know anything about Lockerbie.
Oh, that's...
But some,
So you'll have
not
to...
with all this.
Okay. So December 21st, 1988. So regular flight that Pan Am ran. It was a 3-stage flight. It would go from Frankfurt to Heathrow, where they would change plane, and then it would go Heathrow to New York, and then there was a third leg that went, I think it was to Detroit. And on December 21st, just before Christmas, as 38 minutes after takeoff, a bomb exploded in the hold of the plane, and 259 passengers and 11 people on the ground were killed 4 days before Christmas. There have been 2 TV dramas out just recently about it with very different takes on it. One of them was Jim Swire's story. So he was the father of one of the passengers, Flora, who was he was very involved in sort of campaigning for justice. And then when he got the people that he encouraged, he actually went out and met with Gaddafi to get Gaddafi to release Megrahi and Fema to let them make them stand trial. And then as that unfolded, he realized that he came to the conclusion that he had been completely duped by with regard to their guilt, and that they'd been fitted up effectively. The BBC drama was much more about the establishment version of events. Now, it got some stuff incredibly right in terms of portraying this sort of thing, and that it went into a lot of stuff about the way that people's belongings, which had been scattered all over the ground, the locals just rallied around and started organising. When they realised that nobody was doing that, they just had this big bloody warehouse full of everybody's stuff. And when the local women of Lockerbie realised that people's personal belongings weren't being treated with respect and the families weren't getting their things back, they spent months basically sorting things out, working out what belonged to whom, and laundering things and returning people's belongings to them in one of the most beautiful and thoughtful processes imaginable. And it covered that, and it covered that really, really well, which makes what I have to say about the rest of it all the more disappointing, because there were some liberties taken with how with the facts of the case in terms of the case against Megrahi and Fema. So when Pan Am 103 went down, the initial assessment by pretty much everybody was that it had been a revenge attack by Iran for the downing of one of their passenger jets by a US warship, the Vincennes, that had happened earlier that year, where in excess of 200 people had died. And that is, I mean, if you look into that incident, it is utterly shocking. And the Americans didn't even pretend to be apologetic about it. They blamed the airliner for not responding to them, even though they hadn't been signalling on commercial channels. They'd been signalling on military channels. They thought it was a military plane. They were signalling on military channels. So of course the plane wasn't responding because it wasn't receiving it. But they'd be like, well, they didn't respond. Yeah, they didn't respond because they didn't fucking hear you, right? So and they shot it out of the sky. So the Iranians were, not unreasonably, absolutely raging, and had said that there would be, that there would be bloodshed. They would, give America a black eye, and they wanted something that was basically of equal size and scope. So the assessment was initially that a splinter group from the People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which was the People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, so the PFLPGC, who were operating near Frankfurt in Germany. And everybody reckoned it was them, because just I think a month or two, a couple of months before the Lockerbie incident, the German security services had arrested a number of them with bombs that were clearly designed to go off in airplanes. So they were the bombs had been fitted into Toshiba bomb beat radio cassette players because they're funny and they had bomb in them. So haha, aren't we funny? Murdering people. The devices used what were called ice cube timers. So these were they were called ice cube timers because the timer was a little tiny square, like cube. And they used a barometric trigger. So the ice cube timers would run for about half an hour. They were pretty crude. And so the barometric trigger was set that it would trigger usually around 7 or 8 minutes after takeoff when the air pressure dropped to a sufficient level. That would trigger the timer, and then that would give you half an hour. So that would be enough time for the plane to be high enough that the pressure inside the cabin compared to the outside pressure would mean that if the bomb went off, it would cause a catastrophic depressurization and cause the plane to completely fail. So yeah, the Autumn Leaves operation in Frankfurt had swept up some of these, and I think they were arrested with 3 or 4 of them in the car, but it was understood that there was actually 1 or 2 more that had been made that had gone missing. And so the entire focus of the operation, of the investigation on the ground in Scotland to begin with, was all down this route of trying to find a link to them and trying to find evidence for them. And there were, to be honest with you, that there were times, it was one of these things where it was obvious that it was them, and when they were, so obviously they're swooping up pieces from the ground and putting back together and working out what's what. And I'll show you a picture of the luggage containers. So what had happened with where the bomb was, they worked out by doing controlled explosions of cases in different positions that so you've got the hull of the aircraft.
You'd be able to post this on Blue Sky, unless someone wants to.
There's the hull of the aircraft, which is obviously curved like this, and you have these luggage containers that are sort of like a cube with then a little bit at the side that's angled upwards, so you can make maximum use of the space in the hold. And they worked out from controlled explosions that you basically had to have the bag along this bit here somewhere, otherwise the explosion would be absorbed by the rest of the baggage and may not breach. And they'd worked out which of these baggage holding containers it had been in based on the damage that one of them showed and where that damage was. And when they were inspecting it, small pieces of like the kind of black plastic that electronic devices have housing around them, and they managed to work out between that and the fact that they found a manual for a Toshiba bomb beat radio cassette player, which only pointed further to this having been what had been what the bomb had been made of. So they worked out also that the primary suitcase that had been housed in had to have been a Samsonite hard shell case. And I think it was antique gold or antique bronze, but it was a sort of metallic brown kind of thing. So and these were only sold in the Middle East. There was a relatively limited run. So I think there was something like 35,000 of them, 34,000 of them, something like that made. It was not a lot in the grand scheme of things, and they were only sold in the Middle East. So you've got everything pointing kind of to it being there, even down to like they found shredded pieces of the manual, because what the bombers would do would be that they would have these in their box looking like they were a present for somebody, and that's why it's in a suitcase kind of thing.
Just on that point,
Yeah.
then that speaks to the idea that we have to disguise this enough to get it onto the plane, but they would know that if any of this was ever found very swiftly, the trail would go back to them.
Yes.
So that maybe speaks to the idea that none of this stuff was ever really intended to be found by investigators, potentially.
No, and I mean there's a few myths that kind of exist about Lockerbie. One of them being that the plane was delayed, and it wasn't. The feeder flight from Frankfurt to Heathrow, I think, was running late, which meant that they only had 20 minutes changeover time at Heathrow. But the Heathrow to America part was not, in fact, delayed. It was a 6 o'clock scheduled flight. It pulled away from the gate at 4 minutes past 6 and took off kind of 20 odd minutes later, which is perfectly normal. I mean, if you've ever flown out of Heathrow, then you know, I mean, it takes you solely half an hour to get to the runway. So it was, you know, it might have been a couple of minutes late, but I mean, this is one of these things. It's really a pervasive myth that the flight was late and that therefore it went off over ground. And it's just not really true. Even the BBC series had that. You had somebody on saying, "Oh yeah, it looks like we're going to be delayed." It's like, why can you not get even that right? Do you know what I mean?
There's
That's
a timer.
big.
So when does the timer activate then?
So this is the thing. If it had been one of these timers, then the barometric trigger would go off around 7 or 8 minutes after takeoff, and then you'd have half an hour, and it would be they would routinely kind of go between 35 to 40 minutes after takeoff, just depending on what point you hit that pressure. And these timers were not absolutely brilliant and exact. They gave you roughly half an hour. And Pan Am went down 38 minutes after takeoff.
So the bag is put on the bag is put on a Heathrow.
So this is where we get to it. So it was a massive surprise to everybody when all of a sudden there was an announcement, sort of, went out in the news that instead of the Iranians and the People's Front of Judea, Frankfurt Bureau, instead of them, that actually it was Libya, because this seemed to come out of absolutely nowhere. But the explanation for how it had been arrived at looked like some absolutely amazing detective work, it had to be said. So we may as well run through what that official narrative is, because only by explaining what's wrong with it can you kind of see. So the idea was that instead it hadn't been an ice cube timer. It had been what was called an MST-13 timer. These were made by a Swiss company, a little kind of 3-room operation called Mebo, which stood for Meister and Bollier, which were the two guys that owned it. And they had a design technician called Lumpart, I think, who designed the circuit boards for things. And these guys were shady as fuck. So they made and sold MST-13 timers to Libya via a guy who had an office, a Libyan guy who had an office in the same building as them, called Megrahi.
He's like, "Can we buy some timers off you? What for?" "Yeah, just, it's
Well,
for the lights, light to come on at a certain time."
we went out to Libya and saw them testing them for explosions, and I mean, there's plenty of reason to want timers for ground explosions. So, these were military hardware, effectively. it's Switzerland. What are you going to do? The Swiss are going to Swiss. But so they'd sold 20 of them to Libya, and initially it was believed that they'd only ever sold these timers to Libya, and that there were no more in existence, and therefore, so MST-13 timers and Megrahi had been in. Sorry, other facts I need to tell you about. Sorry, they'd found fragments of clothing that obviously come from the primary suitcase that had been manufactured in Malta. There was still labels intact and bits and pieces of them. And it took quite a lot of detective work because for them to work out that not all of it was labelled as being made in Malta, but they were able to find out eventually that some of the labels were Maltese manufacturing companies. And one of them had a batch number on it. So they were actually able to track down the exact shop where it had been purchased. And they went to the shop to interview.
Just briefly, when we're talking about investigating, are we talking, who is investigating this?
Sorry, it was the Scottish police force.
It's initially Scottish.
Yeah.
So the Americans are going to become involved, but at this stage,
No. So they are involved.
Just us local boys doing this.
It was Police Scotland managing the operation, but with assistance from the FBI. Because so many
That's what I was raising for that. What was the relationship between the two?
It was quite often acrimonious because the Police Scotland felt that the Americans were often holding stuff back from them, and the FBI.
We thought we'd give them that.
Yeah, and the FBI were talking to the CIA, and the FBI were convinced, because there's a lot of acrimony between the FBI and the CIA, jurisdiction friction, and the FBI felt like the CIA were keeping stuff from them for their usual shady shit reasons, all of which is true. So they've realised that the stuff that's been manufactured in Malta in the primary suitcase surrounding, like padding out the suitcase.
I should make feel if you're the cop and you've managed to piece together these tiny fragments, you're like, that we can track this to a specific shop.
Fucking shop. Yeah.
You thought, eureka, this is like...
And then they go into the shop and interview and so it's a family-run business by the Gauchis. The dad owns the shop, and it's two adult children. So yeah, I'm saying children, but guys in their 30s or 40s. Tony Gauchi and Paul Gauchi. And amazingly, Tony thinks he actually remembers the transaction. And I remember years and years and years ago, when all of this was first on the news, when the trial was going on and this was being covered, I remember hearing this and thinking, bullshit. I remember right then thinking, I don't fucking believe that. You remember a fucking guy buying some trousers 10 months ago? Fuck off. But I mean, people remember things sometimes. Mostly people think they remember things and don't, but that's another matter. But anyway, the reason he had actually, to be fair to him, some reason to remember a particular transaction that they thought may be the one. And it was that he'd had a row with his girlfriend on that day, and his brother, who was meant to be working in the shop with him, and had sloped off to watch football. So he was in the shop by himself, and this guy was buying all sorts of everything, and it didn't really match, and he was buying clothes that didn't fit him and didn't seem bothered, and said, well, it's not for me, and like it didn't count.
It was like fit a suitcase.
You kind of, the sort of thing where actually he just thought it wasn't a normal sale.
It's like the guys that go into like B&Q and they're buying like a rope and a space and a bag of lime, like getting dusty.
It's always sunny when they're in the fucking boot of the car going like, why have you got all that stuff in there? And it's like knives and gloves.
What if you got the big bag of stuff that dissolves flesh? Yeah. So he did have reason to sort of like remember this odd interaction, because this guy, he said, it was like my best sale of the year. Do you know what I mean? The guy bought loads and loads of stuff.
I think that's quite fair.
So actually, it is sort of fair that he did remember. And
how well are you going to remember the physical characteristics of the guy? I just remember the incident, but
So this thing, what he remembered of it was that. So it was coming up to Christmas time when it happened. so it's December 88, December 21st, 88, and he thought that this had happened coming up towards Christmas, but before the Christmas lights had gone on. And he remembered that it was raining because the guy was buying everything, and so while he was in the shop buying everything, he actually suggested to him to buy an umbrella for the rain, and the guy bought an umbrella. And he gave a description of him as being in his 50s, 6 foot or taller, big guy with a broad chest and very black hair. Now, I don't know if any of you ever seen a photograph of Megrahi, but he was 5'7". He was in his 30s and he was pale skinned. So this was one of the times when I was watching the BBC drama where I had to stop and have a 10-minute rant at my husband, who eventually said, "Can we carry on watching now?" Because when the police, when they filmed the scene of him interviewing Tony Gauci, they have him say, "Oh yeah, the Christmas lights were on." Now, he did eventually testify that the Christmas lights were on, but his initial thing was that the Christmas lights were not on. And this is one of these crucial little facts. The Christmas lights went on the 6th of December. Megrahi often flew into Malta. People Libyans are always going to Malta because it's basically just across the water from them. And it's a sort of trading point. Guys will go to Malta for a night out, basically, because it's girls and drink and stuff that's not so easy to get back home kind of thing. But there's a lot of business done in Malta because it's this point where the Middle East meets the Mediterranean. And so Megrahi was in Malta on the 7th of December, but it didn't rain on the 7th of December and the Christmas lights were up. Whereas, there were 2 dates that it could be for this football match, assuming that he's right about Paul having sloped off, and that's why he's in the shop by himself. But apparently Paul used to slope off a lot. So Paul sloping
Fucking Paul.
Fucking Paul. So Paul having sloped off, it could have been another date, if you see what I mean, because it was November, December, it does rain.
I see where this is going. So we have a situation where we're relying on one guy's memory, and if this guy is wrong, the direction of investigation goes one way, and if it's right, it's the other way. It's a massive fork.
But in the first instance, he thinks and they never, at the time, they never established when the Christmas lights went on, although investigators for Megrahi later on did establish when the Christmas lights went on. But he later testified that, I actually wonder if they didn't, in fact, find out that the Christmas lights went on the 6th, because he later testified that the lights were on when initially said that they were off. If it's the dates in November, if it's a date in November instead, then Megrahi can't be the purchaser.
Yes.
Megrahi also probably isn't the purchaser because he isn't half a foot taller than himself and broad-chested.
So he'd be able to see Megrahi's in a trench coat?
I didn't think of that.
Whatever it is.
It's also an odd thing as well, because to come back slightly to the Swiss and everything like that, usually with these kinds of things, it wouldn't just be one person. It would be a series of. That seems to not be being discussed here either. The idea of a team effort.
Allegedly, so this was where the other bit came in. There were 2 other sources of evidence that blamed Libya and blamed Megrahi and FEMA. One was that a fragment of a circuit board the size of a sort of fingernail was found embedded in a piece of fabric that had come from a shirt that was clearly a Maltese manufactured shirt. And they reckoned that this was from an MST13 timer. And you wouldn't believe how much time I've spent on the internet. There are entire fucking websites dedicated to this.
For context here, Tucker has a full A4 binder of notes. A laptop is sat here and a full book. So yeah,
There's actually a cork board up in the wall.
It's straight. Get boxes full of Megrahi. So this, if you want to look this up, Google PT/35B. So you can see that this this was the fragment, and there's a sort of bit of solder, the bit of tinning that's like the shape of a sort of serif 1. And that looks absolutely fucking identical to that. And they and this has been found, and they couldn't work out what it was, but there were, it had been in the blast suitcase, and it was definitely not part of the electronics from the Toshiba radio. So they were convinced it had to be part of the electronics of the bomb, which is not an unreasonable thing to assume. And they were apparently trying to find a match for it for over a year, and then eventually they let the CIA have a go, and they managed to identify it really quickly.
Oh, that's so strange.
As an MST13 timer, because apparently they'd taken one from an arms cache that they'd seized in Toga, and there'd been one there. So this is the point at which the link to Meebo gets
That
made.
guy's basically selling these things to anyone who
Well,
wants one.
not exactly, but so you can understand, and then you can understand why. So yeah, like this fucking looks like that, right? It definitely looks like that, and it's a fairly unusual little bit of circuitry. And you can see there's a cutout here, and this cutout, if you Google one of these, this cutout corresponds to where edges from the circuit boards were clipped in order to fit them into a box. So some of the models of these were made without a box, and some of them were put into boxes. And if they were put into boxes, they had this cutout, and you can clearly see that this curve here is from that cutout. So it's you can completely see why you'd go, yeah, fuck me, that's that. Absolutely. So you've got the shopkeeper saying that he sold clothes to somebody that wasn't interested in whether they fitted him or not. The match clothes that are found in the suitcase, you've got this. And then they had an informant, a guy called Jacka, who had worked with Megrahi and FEMA, and he was a CIA informant, and he'd been getting paid by the CIA for some period of time. And he had said that he was a Libyan Secret Services operative, and that everybody he worked with was too. And he testified at the trial against Megrahi and FEMA that they were responsible, and that he had seen them put a bomb onto a flight at Malta. He'd seen them put a suitcase, he'd seen them with a hard-shelled brown Samsonite suitcase at the Maltese airport, Lua airport, on the day of the bombing earlier in the day. And so the theory with regards to what had happened was that using one of these MST13 timers that could run for days, they could run for extended periods of time, that they had set the bomb on at Lua airport in Malta, that it had gone to Frankfurt, where it had a Pan Am rush tag on it. So it's basically that it's unaccompanied baggage that needs to be sent on to America. Now, back in the good old days, before 9/11, you could fucking get away with all sorts of, like, airport security was beyond, like it's just fucking unreal shit that they used to. So, and there was a note in FEMA's notebook. So we need to say Megrahi and FEMA both worked for the airline, the Libyan national airline, or had done, and so they were involved with Libyan security services because they were civil servants, and the airline was, they used to have Megrahi, I think, used to do training for the people who the Libyan secret services would put on planes as sort of guards, because apparently they were all behaving like absolute arseholes and fucking getting their gun out and shouting at people and stuff like that. So he had to train them in terms of like behaving themselves. Just absolute fucking.
But he knows the inside track on the airport security.
But he knows inside track.
Yeah.
So he looks like a great fucking suspect. You've got to say. And he had a fake passport. He had been using that to travel into Malta. I can completely see why, as these things became apparent to the Scottish investigators, why these guys look so good for it. Absolutely. Now, Megrahi's explanation of this is that actually he was doing procurement. So Libya was under sanctions because they were getting up to all sorts of shady shit because Gaddafi was a complete fucking monster. Which meant that his airline frequently couldn't source spare parts and consumables and things like that. So, so he'd already had affiliation with the Secret Services because he'd been training them to not be dicks on planes, I think. And he was doing procurement for stuff. And also, he said civil servants in Libya got paid fuck all. You couldn't live off the salary. So everybody had a side hustle. And so him and his mates would anything, because he had the ability to sort of leave the country and fly cheaply because he worked for the airline. Anything that they could get their hands on, that they could buy to bring home and sell, they would. Sometimes it was nuts and apricots, sometimes it was washing up liquid, sometimes it was car parts, sometimes it was airplane parts. I don't find that particularly disbelievable. Was he perhaps doing other shady stuff? Possibly. Absolutely possibly. He certainly had a fake passport. So, it's not that he wasn't involved with the security services, the JSO as they're called. He was, but he was also like a civilian with a job and a family who was...
So are we going with his motivation here would purely have been for money? Is it he was getting paid or he is trying to create...
was that this was a Libyan-sponsored plot. So, I mean,
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
a Libyan...
He's been tasked to do this.
been tasked to do this on behalf of the Libyan
And
government.
why was the Libyans would just want to...
I mean, there was sponsoring terrorism. There was also they bombed a Berlin nightclub full of American soldiers.
But it's not as strong a motive as...
It's nowhere near as strong a
with the
motive as
Iran one.
Iran war, where it really was like for like.
But the cops are doing the job correctly because they're listing, that they're being led by the evidence, so that they're not starting with an assumption, which is they are actually, unlike a lot of the other cases we've talked about, they're actually doing the thing in the correct order.
Yeah, within reason.
And this Dickens had like air bombed, Gaddafi as well, try to take him out. So
Yeah.
they had motivation.
Yeah, I do not in any way want to pretend that like Libya was a saint. It really fucking wasn't. It was, and it had been sponsoring terrorism. Gaddafi was a monstrous man. But just because they've done other shit doesn't mean you can do them for this, I would say. So Jacka had basically put them there. You've got the MST-13 timers that have been purchased. And you've got Tony Gauci saying that somebody, and he did say that he thought the guy was a Libyan.
Okay.
Although apparently the Maltese quite often use Libyan just as a generic term for people of Arab descent generally, because so many of them are Libyan. So it's not quite although they probably can differentiate Libyan from other accents because loads of Libyans go there. So there's that. So far so good. I mean, you can completely see why you would do this. Now, there's a few things that transpire. So they eventually go to trial. Megrahi is found guilty, but FEMA is exonerated. The reasoning for that is to do with sort of peculiarities of Scottish law and the requirement for corroboration, because basically there was a 3-judge panel, 3 Scottish judges, and they did not believe the evidence of Jacka at all, with good reason. He was a fantasist and a liar and a thief and just a complete fucking loony. He told the CIA that he was much more important than he was. I mean, basically, he was like a deputy station chief for the airline. And apparently the ground crew, he would be charged with paying the ground crew sort of per diems and things like that. And he would just keep it and not pay them. And they were always having to complain about them. He was always trying to get money for something. He didn't want to do military service, and he persuaded the CIA to do an operation on his arm so that he wouldn't have to serve in the military. He told him he was a member of the royal family, and then he denied that he said this, but he didn't know why they would have written it down otherwise. He was just a liar and a fraud. I mean, this is one of the things I found particularly galling about the BBC documentary, is that they made him out to be this great guy and this whistleblower and all the rest of it, and they completely didn't mention at all the problems with his testimony, or that his testimony had been comprehensively rejected. I mean, this is from Private Eye's coverage of it. So, I mean, there were a load of CIA cables that came out about Jacka, where their assessment of him, and it was obvious that they thought he was fucking useless and they didn't know what to do with him. So
how did the CIA find this guy?
he just walked into their offices and offered himself, and they were paying him $1,000 a month apparently, which was not an insubstantial amount of money.
So you could suggest there's maybe a tail wagging the dog situation going on here, as in the CIA are paying him potentially to say things they want to hear.
And he never even mentions anything to do with Lockerbie, certainly before or in the immediate aftermath of it. It's only when about a year after the CIA are basically saying to him, if you don't come up with something useful soon, we're going to fucking leave you here in Malta and you can fucking sort yourself out, essentially. At which point, all of a sudden, he remembers that his bosses, FEMA and Megrahi, when he worked for the airline, had actually planted the bomb, and that he remembers seeing them with a hardshell suitcase and blah, blah, blah.
And these three Scottish judges basically go, did you?
That's absolutely it. And that's the end of him. And so because he was the only corroboration for FEMA having any involvement, they rejected that, and that's why FEMA was found innocent.
And then what we're left with is the testimony of the shop owner.
So the shop owner and the timer. The other thing is that based on what was available of the luggage records, they believed that the plane had gone on. Sorry, that the bag had gone on in Malta.
Yes.
Now, that is heavily disputed, and here's why. It turns out that the German authorities at Frankfurt didn't back up the computer data on the bag transits for that day. So there was no record of what bag, there was no proper record of what bags had gone where from where. And back in those days, everything didn't have a label on it and, get scanned away. I mean, these days, if you fucking buy something for $5 off Amazon, you'll be able to set up tracking points for it. But none of that existed back then. And they were always more worried about destination than where things had come from. So where it was going to was always of more importance than where it had come from in terms of what records they kept. So the flight from Malta to Frankfurt had 55 bags on it.
Right.
And 55 had been counted off at Frankfurt, but this was all coded through little stations at Frankfurt Airport. And it seemed to be that in the period of time when these bags had been coded, there were actually 56 entries, not 55. And from that, they concluded that there had been an additional bag on the Maltese flight, and that therefore, because you've already got the connection with the clothes, so you're already thinking Malta is the source of this bomb. So it's gone on at Malta, and here we have this extra bag. There's just one problem with that. It's bollocks. Okay? Lua had arguably the most stringent security of any airport anywhere at the time, because they'd had a hijacking a couple of years earlier. And they had a double-blinded counting process whereby the bags would be counted inside the airport by one team, and then they would be counted onto the plane by the plane crew, like the plane team, and then both figures would be reported like phoned in to a guy whose job it was to reconcile those two numbers. And if those two numbers were not the same, they would empty all the bags off the air of the plane and count them again. And if there was still any discrepancy, they would then get the passengers off the plane and make the passengers identify what bags belonged to them to make sure that there was no bag unaccounted for on the plane. And it was 55, 55, 55. This was actually proven, right? At one point, Granada made a documentary about this and featured a little bit of, you know how you get those wee dramatizations of a shady-looking Arab putting a Samsonite suitcase on a Lure Airport. And Lure Airport, by this point, had quite about enough of this and sued them.
Yep.
And it was a UK-based legal firm that took this on, and they absolutely exhaustively investigated every single bag and identified every single bag. There was no unaccounted for luggage, and Granada said very sorry and settled out of court.
And McGrahy would know this because we've already sort of established he's quite savvy when it comes to airport security, of any nature. So it would seem an unusual point if you were aware of that. Why would you pick that airport and not one of the ones that was a bit more lax in security and bag counting?
So the thing is, had he wanted to do that,
Yeah.
then there would have been 56 bags counted, and one of them would have been like an unaccompanied bag with a Pan Am Rush tag on.
Yes.
But none of that happened. So if you had wanted to do it that way, you could have done it that way. But there would have been 56 bags.
And that's why they didn't do it that way, because it would fall down. They would get caught.
Well, they didn't do it that way because they didn't do it, would be my opinion.
But the motivation for not opting for that.
But the only reason that they thought it was Malta was because of the clothes. And you've then got this information from the CIA informant saying that these guys are involved, and you're looking at the only evidence that remained in existence from the German system, because this was absolutely amazing. They just didn't back up the computer, and in those days, the massive volumes, they had to write everything over within a week. They just didn't have the capacity to keep it all for longer. Was a printout that one IT person had taken when they'd heard about the crash, and that they'd kept just in case it came in useful. But there was one additional bag that had been coded at Frankfurt at the stations. So the flight from Malta came in, and at the same time, a flight from Damascus came in. And the bags from the Maltese flight were coded at station, I think it was 207, but they coded at a particular station. And the only evidence of how long it had taken to code them was a handwritten note that was either like 10 minutes past the hour or 16 minutes past the hour, and no one could decipher which. And then the Damascus flight's bags had been checked, and then there were other flights getting getting checked in at the same time. So the argument was this one additional bag that had been coded at that station in this window meant that actually 56 had come off, even though only 55 had been counted. But actually, here again, independent investigators sat and watched the coding being done at one point at Frankfurt Airport on a different day, on another session, just for evidence gathering, and said it was a free-for-all. In those days, if you'd got lost luggage or if you'd got a bag that was travelling unaccompanied, people would the staff would just walk up to any coding station and put it in. And there'd be no record of what flight it had come on so the idea that this one note means that came from Malta is frankly ridiculous. Now, the next thing is that the evidence of a baggage handler at Heathrow. So this is where this gets incredibly interesting, and I am very firmly of the view that the most likely thing that happened is that the bag went on at Heathrow. The bomb was manufactured in Frankfurt. I'm I think that's not an unreasonable thing to conclude based on the autumn leaves operation and seizure of the other ones that were very similar. But it could have come over from Frankfurt at any point. The odds are it probably came over the day before, and there's a reason why. I'll tell you why I think that is. But it probably just came on in a different flight from Frankfurt to Heathrow, not armed, and was then armed and put on at Heathrow. So there's a baggage handler who worked for Pan Am at Heathrow. I think his name was Bedford. I can check that. And he was handling.
Because I would assume as well that the frequency, because the target, if we're going with the concept of it being
Bedford.
Iranian revenge, the number of flights going to the States out of London is going to be far more frequent. So because that's the other thing I was going to ask about the plane. It's not that this particular plane was targeted; it was just any plane.
Well, they wanted Pan Am because that was.
Of which there would have been loads of them going through at the time, London back to New York, and so
I mean, I imagine. I think they wanted something of equal size, and it was a prestigious.
Yeah.
It was prestigious plane and route.
But in theory, where I think we're going with this is a baggage handler could just have been waiting for that, a plane of that size that is bound for America.
No, so
or
Bedford is the baggage handler that's working that day. So what would happen was that the Frankfurt flight would come in. I think that was a 727, and then the leg that goes from Heathrow is a 747, and the passengers get off and get on the plane, and the luggage gets taken off, and you have what's called interline baggage, which is lost luggage or stuff that's traveling without accompaniment that is waiting in the shed. And so they put that ready into a container, and then when the other flight's unloaded, the luggage off that gets added in onto the top of that stuff, and then that gets put on to the plane that's going out, along with any. They'd also have the luggage that was coming in from the passengers that were getting on at Heathrow, as opposed to coming, because a lot of people would just do one leg, so it was like 103A, 103B sort of thing. So a lot of people would just maybe do the Frankfurt to Heathrow bit, not go on to America, because you're changing plane. That's really
you definitely put the baggage on at London, because the plane you want to target is the 747.
Yes.
Because if you put it on at Malta and the aircraft is an issue and it's got to divert or it's got to go back,
it could go anywhere.
You're fucked. But it's clear that when the baggage was on, they're putting it on the plane that they want to blow up. And therefore, that really has to happen for guaranteed success.
And it would
in London.
So here's the other thing. It took them a long period of time to work out which was the primary suitcase. They had to piece together, like tens of thousands of fragments of things to work out what's what. But over time, you build a picture of there's one particular bag that's it's got the most blast damage on it, and it's clearly the one that. This bag, and they can build a picture of this bag was here and this bag was here because of the way things have been impacted. Bedford, the baggage handler at Heathrow, let me tell you his story. So he's working that day, and he's selected a baggage container. There's a few bits of luggage that have come in that are going onto that Pan Am flight, that the interline luggage, and he's put them into the container. And he's basically sort of filled the bottom of the square. It's pretty quiet, and he goes off on his tea break for about half an hour. He comes back and notices that there's a couple of extra bags have gone in. And he remembers this because it's his job to put bags in. He says that another guy that was working airside had told him that he put them in. That guy says, "No, I didn't say that. I don't load. He loads." So in terms of who had actually loaded them on, it's never been clear. But one of them, he reports 3 weeks after the bomb, before anybody knows where the bomb was or what the case looked like, he reports that while he was on his tea break, somebody put a hard shell brown Samsonite suitcase into that container. Not only that, that where it was sitting was exactly where you'd want the bomb to be for it to breach the hold. And yet, apparently, we're all quite happy to believe that an imaginary bag that went on at Malta was then went on to Frankfurt and then made its way and just so happened to go into the exact right position.
Yes, the evidence doesn't really corroborate it, and also from a motivation or success rate chance, you wouldn't do it the Malta way anyway. The most logical way is what we're talking about here.
I imagine there's sort of like there's economic stuff going on here as well, where they're like, we can't have it seen to be the Heathrow is a dangerous
It
airport.
was absolutely that, right? The UK authorities were absolutely determined that it had gone on at Frankfurt, and Frankfurt was absolutely determined that it had gone on at Malta, kind of thing, you know.
Shit rolls downhill.
Like, got three Spider-Men pointing at each other. It remains the case that Lure had very tight security, that there's no evidence actually that a case went through Frankfurt, that nothing other than this one single coded bag. And before anybody knew what the bomb case looked like, a baggage handler at Heathrow said he fucking saw one just like that. And there weren't any other ones like that in with the established luggage. So I don't have any, you know.
Do you remember a single bag if you're a baggage handler?
Well, you maybe do if and again, it's the unusual circumstance
tea
that
break.
you go off your tea break and you come back and someone's put one in. It wouldn't be unusual for someone to drop one off, but it would be unusual for them to put it in the thing because it was his job to load things in the thing. And so there are a couple of other things which are really important to state here. One is that there was, and this is why I think the case came in the day before, at something like, I think it was like midnight and 30 minutes. So, you know, like a 0:30. There was a break-in spotted at Heathrow on a padlocked door between the reception area, like the bag check area, and airside. So this was known. This was known and reported, and the guy couldn't believe the guy who found it could not believe that he wasn't called to the fatal accident inquiry in Scotland. There's never been a public inquiry about Lockerbie. The families wanted one. Then like the Thatcher government was absolutely determined that they weren't getting one. But so at 12:30, a door with a padlock on had basically been broken open, allowing somebody to get airside. There were also hundreds of security passes that had never been handed back. And security at Heathrow at the time was allegedly like pretty lax. And there were absolutely hundreds of people working there. So in much the same way that if you wanted to, you used to be able to just walk into like BBC wearing a brown coat and walk out with a grand piano. Once you were airside, if you were wandering around in a high vis, you know, with a pass on, no one would stop you. You could pick up a bag from one place, you could drop a bag off somewhere else. So, I mean, I think the case probably came over from Frankfurt on another flight. That whoever it was that broke in from the airside, from the passenger side to airside, went and retrieved that case from somewhere, or it came in earlier and they crossed over that night. But it's quite the thing that makes me think that it came in that night is that that's quite early because the flight out wasn't until 6 o'clock, so you've effectively got 18 hours. Well, no, I think it was about 4 o'clock that they dropped up as 16 hours. It's a long time to be fucking around. But perhaps you had to be if you got to go and collect that bag. But that they armed it and then went and dropped it off just in time for it to go on at Heathrow. Now, this doesn't answer. We've answered the evidence of Jacka is nonsense. Tony Gauchi's testimony moved over time like an Aardman animation, just a little bit, right? He'd identified when they thought it was the Palestinian Liberation Front. they had he'd identified 2 other people as possible candidates for the guy that had walked into the shop. By the time he identified Megrahi as the guy that had come into the shop, he'd already seen photographs of him in the press, and it was known, it was later found out that he'd been carrying around a magazine with a photograph of Megrahi in it for bloody weeks, with the word bomber written on it and a question mark, right? So his identification was, not valid, just not valid at all. I mean, eyewitness identification is almost never valid anyway, unless you actually know the person. It's known to be hopeless. And I mean, if you ever want a giggle, look up Unabomber photo fit and read what happened with that, because that's absolutely fucking hysterical. Like the second photo fit drawn was of the fucking person that had done the first one for them. So they're never.
I think the Netflix documentary has a bit.
Absolutely brilliant. It's like a photograph of the guy that drew the photo fit, and then the second photo fit. Oh, so I mean, that identification was nonsense. Another thing is that the first 2 times he was interviewed, he was very adamant that he hadn't sold the guy a shirt, and then all of a sudden one day he remembered that he had sold him a shirt, and he said it was beige. So here, that there's a couple of great documentaries that get on YouTube made by Al Jazeera, who are the only people who've done proper documentary on any of this. The Maltese copy of Tony Gauchi's statement says that the shirt is beige.
Mm-hmm.
The Scottish copy has the word beige crossed out, and then the version that's been typed into the Holmes computer system, which is the UK police's computer database, has omitted the word beige, and this is because the shirt was grey, not beige. And so with the removal of the one word beige, it becomes possible that this is the shirt, even though the first 2 times. I mean, he even wrote down a list of everything the guy had bought, and there wasn't he was sure he could remember everything. And it was stuff that was in the case, but no shirt, he said. So this fragment of circuit board is found in this bit of shirt. The shirt was apparently found in January 1989, so just about a month after the bomb had gone off. It was found in Northumbria near Kilderwood. And the fragment of circuit board was allegedly found in May of 1989 by a RADA scientist called Hayes. He's worth looking up if you're interested in miscarriages of justice. Just look up him in the Maguire 7, which is related to the Guildford 4 bombing. Because he has basically, they were exonerated on the grounds that he had misrepresented scientific information as an expert witness in court. It later comes out that in June of 1989, the CIA had obtained an MST13 timer from the technician at Mebo, via the Swiss police. In September, another scientist at RADA, Faraday, suddenly writes to the Scottish police, and this is all uber urgent, about this fragment of timer. There's just one problem with the May date of of Hayes first examining this, which is that his notebook, which is all every entry in his notebook is numbered, has been renumbered after the event for every page after the page where he talks about analyzing this fragment on May 12th. So this is why I have my computer with me, because I bought I made a fucking PowerPoint because I just wanted you to see this. I really wanted you to see this. I couldn't fucking believe this. So I'm just gonna pull this up. Sorry, but you can see here. These are the pages of his notebook.
Oh, yeah.
Not so.
No.
Right.
Oh, he's not done a good job there at all.
He hasn't.
These would be the page numbers, I guess.
Yes, at the top of the
And
page.
it's very much like when you're a kid in maths and you wrote the wrong number down and you've just kind of forced forcibly turn that 6 into an 8 or whatever it is. It's very, very amateur.
Short over.
Yeah, brute forced.
So, also the evidence tag from the fragment of the shirt that had this it's supposedly been found on was originally labelled as cloth, but the word cloth had then been overwritten with the word debris.
Okay.
So you can see
Yes.
cloth,
Mm-hmm.
same manner of it's been overwritten with the word debris. So when this was first found, it was written as cloth, but at some point, no one knows when, that was changed to debris. So it just so happens that everything to do with this particular absolutely crucial bit of forensic evidence is actually a bit shady. And if you think, I mean, it seems to be only a few pages after that have been renumbered, but we know that the CIA get one of these timers literally just 2 or 3 weeks later. It's not unreasonable to think that we know Hayes is somebody who had manipulated evidence before, that perhaps he's given it and said, you didn't find that now, we need you to have found that 3 weeks ago. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm saying it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility for that to have happened. Subsequent to all of this, after Megrahi Megrahi is eventually released on compassionate grounds, but he was actually going to get another appeal because he took his case to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, and they found six grounds on which they thought he might reasonably have suffered a miscarriage of justice. But he had cancer. He had pancreatic cancer. Not pancreatic, prostate cancer, I think it was, but he was dying. And he was basically told, we'll just stonewall you, we'll hold up your appeal. You'll die in jail. Or you can, or you can have compassionate release. But nobody admits to this, but it's so obviously what fucking happened, because as soon as he got home, he carried on trying to campaign for his innocence. So why on earth would he have pulled his appeal if not? He was basically like a nod and a wink.
Mm.
You can go home, but we don't want the appeal, because no one wanted this aired.
Mm-hmm.
But in amongst stuff that was later revealed was that Alan Faraday, the scientist at RADA, who had described this fragment at at Megrahi's trial as being similar in all respects to the MST-13 timer, actually knew that that was not true. It was made with a completely different manufacturing process. So the MST-13 timers had professionally made circuit boards by a company called Turing or Turing. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's TH, but it might be Turing. And the what's called tinning on the circuit boards, as would be in a professional manufacturing process, was 70% tin and 30% lead. And the composition of the sort of tracking, if that's what it's called, on these circuit boards is that again, we'll go back to a picture, I'm sorry. So this is going to be very dull for people. But it's in the folder. The composition of the copper on these boards compared to when like amateur or like handmade ones is very different. Sorry, I'm just gonna rustle here for a minute. I badly got this printed out. Here we are. Sorry. So a professionally made one will have this sort of concave profile and a flat top, whereas when they're being handmade, they're sort of rounded because they're blocked on. And when you sort of do like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to use the word amateur in a rude sense, but if you're doing sort of small batch production or whatever, you then use a sort of electroplating system to put a few micron level of tin on, and it was pure tin. So yeah, the circuit board fragment that had been found at Lockerbie had rounded copper and had 100% tin, whereas the MST-13 timers had 30% lead and concave profile. So they're just completely different manufacturing processes that were not the same. So we then have to ask ourselves, how in the world does something that looks so much like it happen to be found in with the debris? And at the risk of being a bit tinfoil hat, it's incredibly fucking suspicious because of all the things that could have been found. Because it wasn't the same, but it bloody well looked like it. It really, really looked like it. And I mean, I can understand why anybody that wasn't across the minutiae of the chemistry of the thing wouldn't understand the difference. But it wasn't that. Now, it later transpired that in addition to, I mean, this bit's amazing. In addition to selling them to Libya, they had actually also sold some to the Stasi, and the Stasi were routinely involved in domestic terrorism cells in West Germany because they're like fucking up the West Germans. So it is possible that there was a route for the Palestinian liberation group to have been using one of these. But if they had, again, why would they not have set it for longer? It doesn't make any sense. The profile of the explosion fits with an ice cube timer.
Mm-hmm. Which fits much more into the idea that it was put on at London, in London.
At Heathrow, yeah.
Heathrow.
Where a bag exactly matching the primary suitcase was seen. So, you know, you go through all this and you go, well, why would they? You know, why? Well, it turns out that that there's a few things that the CIA were up to that might have led them to not want attention to what was going on here. The first is that they seem to have been running some sort of operation and potentially involving drugs. I think this is this is Oliver. This is the Oliver North era, and I think Oliver North has been alleged to have been implicated in this, and that therefore bags were going on at Frankfurt that weren't being screened.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that starts to
So-
make a lot of sense now. Okay.
You can imagine a scenario where, in the first instance, the CIA sees that this plane has gone down and that it's the Frankfurt, like Heathrow, New York one, and goes, shit. Was this us?
How quickly were the Americans on the ground there?
A
Because that might give us a bit of an answer as to
Well,
what-
this is another one of the things that's incredibly suspicious. They were on the ground within 2 hours.
Yeah, that's a wee bit. I take it like en masse on the ground, as in.
Well, not officially. So this is one of the really weird things, is that loads of the locals reported hearing American accents really, really quickly.
Yeah, I'd heard that.
And they were trying to work out where the fuck these people had come from, because it was, you know, the only place that they could have got their drive time wise from was sort of like that they could think was like Carlisle. Now there is a signalling station in the north near Carlisle. So I don't know whether or not they'd hurriedly sent staff up from like the signalling station. That's possible. Assuming it was open then. I haven't checked that. I was just having a look on where are there American military bases in the UK? Where could you fucking get to Lockerbie?
Pretty sure these lads can get on a helicopter and get dropped.
That's the other thing. I mean, they may have come from, I mean, I don't know what the helicopter journey time would be to Lockerbie, but I mean, presumably the CIA's probably got a fucking office in Edinburgh or something, haven't they? You could get there inside 2 hours, couldn't you?
Mm-hmm. I think that's. I mean, yeah, it's more just. I mean, obviously, given the destination of the aircraft, it's Panama, okay, fair enough. But yeah, I've heard that before in several documentaries. That
They've just got the Americans, and they told them that there were aircraft investigators, but the aircraft investigators didn't get there for hours later. So it was obviously social. There was also one farmer who reported seeing a suitcase full of drugs, and like the police and FBI got there and were the Americans, he said, were absolutely raging, right, about this. And a lot of this was never properly recorded in the fatal accident inquiry, which was another of the things, you know, a lot of people were amazed by what they weren't asked. Another thing is that the bomb maker who was working for the PFLPGC.
Gotta work on your branding, guys. Come on.
It's yeah. A guy called Creasat was a CIA asset. And this is one of the things that, so if the BBC drama is to believe, this is one of the things that led the Scottish police to believe that the bombs weren't live, is that he said he'd never made the bombs actually work. But that was clearly bollocks, because while the the German security services were examining them, one of them went off and killed German scientists. So that's just not fucking true. So again, you have a source of embarrassment for the CIA with regards to the fact that their guy has probably made the bomb. They've been put in unscreened bags. So you can imagine straight away the narrative forms, it's gone on at Frankfurt and we're possibly implicated. So they stonewall the FBI ruthlessly. And I can imagine this in a situation where they then start to give them tidbits of information. And because it's like pulling blood out of a fucking stone, the FBI seizes on every little bit of this as something that they fucking got off them. And they could just leave a trail of breadcrumbs to somebody else. Also, at the time that all of a sudden there was the switch to it's Libya, by the way, was at a time of massive unrest. You've got Iraq had invaded Kuwait. You've got hostages in Iran. The American government was ready to do a deal with Iran to get the hostages back. It would have been highly convenient to just blame somebody else. Everybody hated Gaddafi. So now, you know what I mean? It's really, really easy to fit up arseholes because no one cares.
Yeah.
So
What I don't understand is if you're going to do something like that, you don't just do it purely for your own gratification. You're doing it to send a message.
yeah.
But then none of them is actually taking responsibility for it. So there's obviously something else going on there where they're like, maybe it was a mistake or like something
That's what I think.
went beyond what they were meant to do.
Oh no.
So like, oh shit, we need
the
to
Iranians-
track and
No,
did I?
the Iranians sent some like $10 million to the PFLPGC just a couple of days after it had gone off, and cables.
It's compensation because it was actually us, but we'll just let you guys do
Cables. Well, no, they were working for them. They were hired guns, kind of thing, because everybody hated evil America. There's a channel for bit that's still on YouTube in my Lockerbie playlist that discusses the fact that years later cables came out that CIA operatives had got Syrian sources on record saying, oh no, it was us and the Iranians, and everybody knew.
Yeah.
And everybody, the CIA certainly knew. I think the FBI and the Scottish police genuinely thought they got the right guys. And a little bit of massaging here and there of, oh, we'll take out the word beige, and was it raining or was it not raining, and was it the 7th of December, were the lights...
There's been under enormous pressure as well. I mean, I think the Scottish cops in particular, I mean, people, they will have wanted this to have been solved. They want somebody to put the blame on.
His magician, Penn.
Yeah,
He said, like, if you let somebody discover something for themselves, the deception is impenetrable because they'll never see past the fact that they think they solved it.
Yes.
Themselves. And that's what I think happened here, is that the CIA needed it not, they really needed it not to be these guys, because it was going to be like really embarrassing for them, and probably all sorts of nasty stuff that we'll never even fucking understand. So they stonewalled until they could get their chess pieces in place, and then they threw a few fucking scraps and let them solve what they wanted to. And yeah.
But say you are like a Palestinian terrorist and you're responsible for it, you actually really want them to hide that stuff you're wanting to get responsibility for it, to everyone to know
Yeah,
that you did it.
I
Because otherwise it was pointless, like you don't get the benefit of the
but the thing was,
flair and all that it goes with.
yes and no, because in this case, it was a direct retaliation for the Iranian passenger jet going down. And I don't think they had any doubt.
Well, I think in my head it would sort of track that.
Also, people don't want to go to jail.
Yes,
True.
basically they found all the evidence, and if the CIA had been running drugs, they probably would be able to do the investigation pretty thoroughly and actually find out who did it.
Yeah.
So I still think there might be something to the idea that this was meant to happen over the Atlantic. The plane was never really meant to be found, or anything that was found would be useless for an investigation anyway. And then the Iranians could just sort of buzz up the Pentagon and go, "We're even now, don't do any of that shit again, or there'll be another one." And maybe that was meant to be it, because I think optically, I mean, even for terrorism, it's a pretty vicious thing to do.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think it was to do with the way the wind was blowing.
Yeah.
That it stayed over UK land longer than it might.
Well, that's around the 30
It
minutes.
could have easily been over Ireland, or it could have been over the sea. It's entirely dependent on.
Exactly, yeah. But the timer sort of speaks to that kind of idea. That
And if it had been
yeah.
if it had been an MST-13 timer, they could have put hours and hours and hours on it. And so and certainly Megrahi had worked as a flight planner, he would have understood implicitly how long he would need to put on the timer to make sure it went off overseas.
But the critical thing is that you wouldn't do it that way for this. Just think, aircraft things could go wrong on an aircraft. So you take off, you've got a technical fault, you come back and you land. You don't really want timers really until it activates, as you say, like at a certain altitude, which makes perfect sense. The idea you can have a timer that once it's on its way to cruising altitude, it clicks on, and then 30 minutes thereafter, which if things had gone differently, if the weather had been different, whatever, it might have been over the sea. You maybe would have been better going for 60-minute timer rather than 30-minute.
But that would out with the technology they had available to them.
Precisely. So
The other things I said about the MST-13 timers, and Bollier himself mentioned this, was that they were too big to fit into the radio cassette players that were being used. It was a different, although it was a Toshiba Bombi, it was a different model to the ones that had been found in the German car. But that's not, it was the same. I think it was, one set had one speaker, one set had two speakers. I think it was a two-speaker one that was in the case. But I'm sorry.
I just think that the whole Malta thing, as we talked about with the airport security, the bag processing, it just feels like the official story seems unlikely when you put it against what seems like a more plausible series of events, i.e. the type of bomb, where you would load the bomb.
Yeah.
That just fits.
The fact that somebody saw an exact fucking
The political backdrop of it, that just, it's not the sort of like 9/11 conspiracy bollocks. It actually just sounds like out of two scenarios, because the reality is there isn't much evidence to back up the supposed official story. It's kind of even Stevens, and if I was hedging my bets, I would go with the bag goes on a Heathrow version.
The other thing is that both Jacka, I mean, he'd been paid by the CIA anyway to be an informant, but he was moved to the US and paid. And Gauci and his brother were both paid. I think Tony Gauci got $2 million. I think his brother got $1 million. His brother didn't even testify. Slumped off again. Paul's gonna fall. Oh, so I mean, that no leg of the official case stands up, and as I say, Lure Airport fucking sued Granada, and Granada did not want to take that to court. I do find myself wondering whether Granada got the little MI6 touch on the shoulder. We really don't want this aired.
Yeah.
And they settled out of court. So from a legal point of view, it's an established legal fact that it did not go on at Lure Airport.
I think so much time has passed, we'll probably never know what precisely happened. But I think that, I mean, Megrahi's now dead. So it's a shame.
His family is still seeking to claim his name.
And I think that says now up to the kind of almost the legacy now, because it's so long ago. I mean, 1988 is quite a long time now. So to try and actually get to the bottom of precisely what happened. I think the best that you can probably evidence, but it would require the CIA to be honest, would be come forward and say, I think you guys were at it.
You might
but
probably expect Paul to do a full shift.
That's exactly. Yeah. It's not going to happen.
CIA is nearly over now, really, isn't it? So maybe
Yeah,
it's like the last season of the CIA. Once it's finished, maybe all of that will come out. But I mean, it was almost 40 years.
I think they privatized. I think Palantir run the CIA.
John, there's one there's a couple of like totally mad things that aren't involved in any of what we've talked about here. So one is that like the wildest theory with regards to Lockerbie is that actually the CIA did it because there were two CIA agents on board who were apparently on their way home to expose the fucking drug route. So like good CIA guys versus bad CIA guys. That's a bit rich for my tastes, quite frankly. Never say never. It is the CIA.
That's the theory I
Yeah.
have now. I've said fine.
I wish they could have waited till they arrived and then just shot them in the back of the head. That seems more efficient.
Yeah, exactly. A bit rich for my taste. The other one is, and this is just fucking weird. This one, but so I swear this is fucking true. When the plane went down, there was a surgeon, like a trauma surgeon who worked for the police surgeon, called David Fieldhouse. I'm sure that's his name. And he saw it on the news, and he realized a plane crash. There's a couple of like maybe 3-4 hours drive from me is potentially going to have people in need of a surgeon with my skills. And so he called the police, said, do you want me, like, I'll get in my car now. And they said, yes, please. And he drove up the road. When he got there, it became evident very quickly that there was nobody to save. And this man, bless him, spent all night and most of the next day, basically until I think tea time, certifying bodies, and numbering them and taking notes on like what identification there was and the longitude and latitude of their position. And he identified and numbered 59 people. One that was from Lockerbie and 58 passengers. I think he then went and got some sleep somewhere and came back the next day to discover that all of those identifications that he'd made had been removed and replaced.
All right. Okay.
With 58,
Mm-hmm.
not 59 markings. He continued to be involved because obviously he was, and he went through the records of what bodies were found and said that and has said since that he could not identify from the official record of where bodies were one of the bodies that he had found, DCF-12. So that was it was his initials and the number.
Yeah, he's drug man, and he's got to take the cocaine off
So-
the plane, hasn't he?
DCF-12
Yes.
was not in any of the he said the only thing he could think was that maybe he had actually sort of got the geolocation wrong, maybe, but he didn't think so. But consider that you might be wrong. Maybe he'd made a mistake, but he couldn't identify from the official descriptions of where everybody was. DCF-12. When the fatal accident inquiry was going on in Scotland, and sorry, just to say, at all times he was abiding by Scottish laws with regard to evidence, which was that he had a policeman with him who was corroborating everything that he had done, so it was all legit under Scottish law. Where the fatal accident inquiry was going on, some member of the Scottish Constabulary basically told a load of lies about him at the fatal accident inquiry and made out like he'd been wandering around the fields like a deranged man, like writing numbers on bodies by himself, which was not true. And he was really annoyed and upset by this, so he came and gave evidence to the fatal accident inquiry, and the policeman that had been with him corroborated that, yes, that all of this was untrue. He then spoke. He was interviewed for a couple of documentaries about it, and very shortly afterwards, he was sacked by the police.
Because he couldn't identify.
Yeah,
Because he's talking.
because he was So they tried to basically give the sense that what he was saying about bodies and things like that was not true. So I mean this is absolutely fucking outstanding. But
Yeah.
there is the possibility that there was an additional person on the plane that was not on the manifest.
I think that
CIA gonna CIA.
Yeah, I think that's where it all comes down to. 'Cause I think what I'm reading between the lines of here is, I think there's like botches on all sides of this, and that's why the truth is so murky.
Yeah.
Because I think the terrorist attack itself was botched. I think it wasn't meant to explode over land.
Probably wasn't, but I think the thing to bear in mind is that you've got this, it's going to go off somewhere between kind
Yeah.
of 35 and 40 minutes after takeoff, because it just is.
Well, you'd probably weigh it up. You would sort of say, like, the odds are it will probably blow up over the ocean, but there's a possibility that it might not. But you'd go with the ideal scenario.
And also you don't care because you're a murderous.
Right, so you're not going to be super careful about it. But on the other side of that, you've then got the CIA doing like the world's laziest drug smuggling operation. And it's the sort of clattering of those two things together then leads to all
So
the confusion around
the
it.
CIA bomb, so the bomb maker in that terror cell is a CIA asset, and they're running the drugs, and there's 2 CIA agents on the plot, right? All like, I swear I'm not making this up. I am not on camera.
Gangsters, aren't they? It's really inconsequential, silly gangsters.
But so you've got all this, like, you can imagine that when that plane goes down, their first response is, shitty death, what have we fucking done? Right, this is going to be on us. And that there's an immediate arse covering thing goes on, because they were desperate to get CIA agents fucking briefcase as well. There's a big hoopla about that. There was another weird sighting of some fucking box covered in a tarp with a helicopter. Like the mountain rescue guys were out looking for bodies, because obviously they're ideally placed to do.
It's like the idea of like a black helicopter under a tarp, but just how not subtle that shit.
Well, it was a white helicopter.
Like a white
actually.
helicopter. Okay.
Yeah, the private eye reporting on this is beautifully snarky, because the person that reported it to Private Eye explained that one of the rescue teams that had been out had reported this to him, but then some politician from the Thatcher government was like, oh yes, well, no, he didn't see this, and he didn't see a white helicopter. And Private Eye's like, we never said the helicopter was white, but it was.
Is that your go-to? Is that your go-to unmarked helicopters you have in the unmarked helicopter garage? Yes. Aye. So that's I thought about when you said about it. I was asked about the Americans and how quickly they got there, and I think that's
Allegedly,
that's likely what's happened. That there will be. Well, I think they will probably have people dotted around, even like near to things like Prestwick, etc., where if they get the call, they'll be able to jump in something mighty fast and get to these types of scenarios.
And this was another thing, apparently. So German records, there's an investigator who worked for Megrahi's legal team, and it's called George Thompson. He features quite heavily in the documentaries that I've watched on this. He's very, very affable and likable. There's with the photo fit that Gauchi had drawn of the guy that had come into the shop. He's showing the sort of camera this, and you hear the interviewer say, so what's the difference between that and Megrahi? He says, well, there's just one difference really, it looks nothing like him. It looks like him if you're racist.
Yes.
But the German records appeared to show the fragment being found in January 1990, not May 1989. I'm just going to go through my notes because there's loads of stuff that as I've been going through, just to make sure that I've not missed anything.
Yeah, so what you're really...
beige written in detail, I say.
Yeah, because what you're really saying is that the CIA via the FBI stall the investigation long enough for them to come up with a story, and then they just start drip feeding.
Yeah,
several months.
That's my view.
Well, I think that actually looks evidence-wise, what you would conclude
Yeah.
from this. Yes.
The other thing is there had been warnings about a bomb being on a Pan Am flight.
Mhm.
The Helsinki warning, and it was sufficiently believed that a load of US diplomatic staff, both in Germany and the UK, cancelled their seats on the flight.
It's always the way with this, isn't it? It's always like just before 9/11, there's all this, it's probably going to be a 9/11 soon, and then people cancelling their flights at the last second.
Be like
Yep.
Mark Wahlberg.
Uh-huh.
Amusement.
I don't trust that Mark Wahlberg one bit.
And this is
Wouldn't have if he'd been on board.
I don't believe so.
this is where
There's definitely Farrell meant to be on one of those planes as well. He could have talked the terrorist out of it with his Stewie voice.
James Swire says his daughter wasn't intending to be going back to America, but at the last minute she changed her mind because her boyfriend was in America and she decided to go back for Christmas. And they didn't think she'd be able to get a seat on a flight, but strangely there were just loads of seats available on the Pan Am flight. It was only like 2/3 full, which on the 21st of December it was incredibly weird. Yeah. And it turns out there'd been loads of cancellation from embassy staff. And his point is, somebody decided that those people were important and that my daughter wasn't important. So my daughter was important.
Supposing the CIA were doing all this drug running, did the airline know much about this, do we think?
Well,
Which might answer why this flight might be quiet, because its purpose was more to transport a fuck ton of drugs.
Because last minute there was cancellations.
No, it was just last. Did kind of was know that the CIA was doing something, but probably wouldn't.
But if you wanted more room in the hold for your big bags of drugs, you could invent
It was one suitcase.
I was just one suitcase. Oh, there, okay. If you're going to smuggle drugs, you're going to smuggle lots of drugs.
Listen, one suitcase full of drugs is quite a lot of drugs.
Quite a lot of drugs. Okay, fair enough.
I mean, you only buy it in wee bags,
Okay.
allegedly.
You also do all these terrorist attacks, but you can't do drug smuggling in a very...
So, wait,
Was
who was it that Private Eye had asked about the white helicopter?
a mountain rescue guy, he said, wasn't it?
There was Mountain Rescues. Let me see if I can find it in the...
It just reminded me of, there's one time I was at the cinema and I was really
So,
afraid.
the white helicopter and the red tarpaulin. Let's just read this, it's good. Mr. Ron Smith was working for a team employed by Galloway Mountain Rescue, searching among the debris left by the exploded plane. 3 days after the bombing, he told the Eye, we were told that a search team had come across a huge red-orange tarpaulin in an open field. It covered a large box or container, far larger than a recording box or anything like that. Above the tarpaulin hovered a helicopter. A man with a gun stood in the door, waving away anyone who approached the tarpaulin. Naturally, no one went near it. When the searchers went back to the scene the next day, they reported nothing but a large hole. The tarpaulin and the container had vanished. It certainly could not have been removed except by a huge vehicle, yet there were no track marks in the field. They concluded that the container must have been lifted away in the air. Mr. Smith talked to Private Eye openly and had no objection to the use of his name. When he said what he said was one of the matters referred to in Mr. Tony Lloyd's letter to Tom Dial, MP mentioned above. As you know, wrote Mr. Lloyd, a story appeared in Private Eye suggesting that armed men in an unmarked white helicopter warned off Mr. Ron Smith of Scottish woodlands from approaching something which was covered in a red tarpaulin. Mr. Ron Smith...
I love the image of the Scottish guy going, what's that? What you got under there?
It's a swatch under your tarpaulin.
It's a helicopter.
Mr. Ron Smith told Dumfries and Galloway Police on the 26th of March 1995, the day after the article appeared, that no such thing had happened to him. He had simply heard this story secondhand from another unidentified person. There is no evidence of any incident which might have given rise to this rumour. Mr. Smith told Private Eye that the story they reported was untrue.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
Mr. Tony Lloyd cannot be counted among the many MPs who read Private Eye and obviously had not read the story he sought to discredit. If he had, he might have noticed this sentence. Ron Smith tells the Eye he was not involved in this incident, but he is sure it happened. He never contacted the Eye to denounce the story that he so freely volunteered. Moreover, most surprisingly, he never mentioned the colour of the helicopter or the markings on it. These were not mentioned anywhere in the Eye article, though Mr. Lloyd attributed to the Eye the information that the helicopter was white and unmarked.
So, a few years ago, 10 years ago, longer. I was really high at the cinema, and I had a huge big thing of Diet Coke. And I went, it was like after the cinema, and I had hardly drank anything because I had just sat, we went to see Ender's Game, and I just sat mesmerised the whole time. We came out, and like I sat my almost full big thing of Diet Coke on like the toilet roll holder, which is obviously shaped like curved, the cylinder, so suited. I sat it on top, and it obviously fell and spilled everywhere. And I was like, right, I can in good conscience go away and like leave this. I need to go and tell someone, but I'm not going to say that I spilled it and admit that I have the motor function of a toddler. So like I went and found the cleaner. I was like, excuse me, just to let you know, someone spilled the Diet Coke all over the bathroom. But he was, thanks very much. And I went to walk away, and he went, how do you know it was diet? It's the exact same thing this case did.
We didn't see a speckled pigeon.
See, that's bad too, is because either he thought that you spelt it, or he thinks she had a resook of it.
But that guy should work for the police. Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's Columbo shit. That is.
You saw all the stuff about in the US Congress about, oh, we did an episode of UFOs a while ago, and they keep talking about these like crash recovery things. And I'm like, it's drugs. It's like obviously just like we biplanes or something like that are crashing, and then the CIA have to go in and pick up their coke. Aliens are not involved in this, but that's how they describe these crash recovery things with the UFOs. They're thinking, yeah, it's just drug shit. It's gonna be that. It's gotta be that.
This is from Private Eye on the suitcase full of drugs. Jim Wilson, a farmer at Tundergarth, Mains. After the crash, his fields were littered with bodies and debris from the airliner. The mess included a suitcase neatly packed with a powdery substance that looked like drugs. He was worried in case the substances could harm his sheep, and he contacted the police. Eventually, after some delay, the suitcase was removed. Farmer Wilson was one of the first witnesses to give evidence when the fatal inquiry started in October 1990. He answered questions, but was very surprised when no one asked him about the drugs suitcase. Some relatives discovered that the name printed on the suitcase, which Jim Wilson remembered exactly, did not appear on the list of passengers for Pan Am Flight 103.
To get, no, that's too much. I was going to say to get very conspiratorial about it, because there was a plane that went down, and I think this is to do with South African conflict, and there's a lot of controversy about it. I wish I had a better memory of this. But what it was to do with was this airline was actually transporting weapons illegally into conflict. So they were using civilian airliners to move explosives around. And that was all kind of covered up in a sort of similar way to this. So just as something to throw in the possibility. But why would they do that? They would have no need to transport. I suppose, but why are they using fucking civilian planes to move these drugs around? Why can't they use the military planes? If where they could they be moving other things apart?
Because they weren't meant to be doing anything. I mean,
It wasn't official.
I know, but
I mean, you know about the Iran-Contra scandal, right?
what I'm saying is that if they were moving drugs using civilian, could they have been moving other things on civilian airliners that possibly would go boom by a mistake, which has been known, to happen before.
I mean, yeah.
Fires in the hole to do with batteries and stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed the limitations of Occam's razor when it comes to, if you're dealing with stupid people, the simplest solution is that a witch did it. But what you're always looking for in an explanation for an event is something that explains everything that you can see. And to me, the solution that explains everything that I can see is that it didn't go on at Frankfurt, but the CIA thought it had, because they thought it was their fault, which caused them to create confusion that prevented. And CIA's instinct is always to not tell the FBI anything because they're fucking scratching each other's eyes out. What went on between the CIA and the FBI with regards to 9/11, this is fucking horrifying. Like, the CIA had plenty of intelligence about what was going on, and they fucking stole all the FBI and investigating that as well. Shower cunts. And the bomb went on in Heathrow. It came from Frankfurt, probably within 24 hours of going out, but not on that flight, because the I mean, this needs to be said. When that bag was seen in the hold, the Frankfurt leg of the flight had not landed and would not land for another couple of hours.
Yeah.
And that baggage handler at that point had no way of knowing what ultimately the description of the case was going to be that was going to be the primary suitcase.
Yep.
So right there, and so then you have to ask, what the fuck is the matter with all of you? You know, like, so we're looking for a suitcase that's like a brown Samsonite suitcase, right? Found one. No, not that one. Right? But yeah, no, not that one. It's definitely not that one, right? Because stuff. Man. Yeah, it's all just stuff about fucking PT35B, I think, from here. I mean, I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. We've done the lead, we've done the copper. Do you want to hear about like stuff, more stuff about Madman Gauchi? Not Gauchi, sorry, Jacka. So again, this is all from Private Eye, so thank you, Private Eye. But I have subscribed to you for fucking years, so I subscribed to you twice, once at work and once at home, so you owe me. Down on his luck, irritated by his employers and the Libyan intelligence JSO, Jack has secretly approached the CIA in the American embassy in Malta several months before the Lockerbie bombing. For many months after the bombing, he said nothing at all about Lockerbie. The CIA's rather bleak assessment of Jacka in all those months was sent by the CIA headquarters in the US by cables from Malta. These cables became an early issue of contention between the prosecution and defense. At first, the CIA resisted any disclosure of the cables, and when they were eventually disclosed, many had been censored with whole paragraphs and sentences scored out or redacted. By early August 2000, it emerged that the prosecution in the case had seen the cables before they had been censored, but had not been shown to the defense. It became clear that there was no doubt at all that the cables utterly destroyed the credibility of the imaginative garage mechanic. That's what he was. That's all he was. He was a garage mechanic for the JSO. It wasn't an agent, but he passed himself off as an agent of the royal family.
Can I try and become a CIA asset? Can I just walk into wherever they're based in the UK and just get a signal?
Liabilities.
I just got
To
it.
start with, he had repeatedly lied to the CIA to impress them with his own importance. He told his handlers he was related to the former King Idris of Libya, which he wasn't. And then he denied saying any such thing, but could not explain how his handlers had arrived at such an absurd invention. He grossly exaggerated his role in the GSO, and even suggested that he had a long-standing personal relation with Abdullah Sanusi, the head of the JSO operations. It was obviously important for Jacka to impress his CIA contacts, as he depended on them for money. He got $1,000 a month, rising to $1,500. The CIA showered him with gifts of clothing and radio sets, and even arranged for sham surgery to his arms. But in spite of this largesse, his handlers in Malta got increasingly fed up with his prevarications and started to conclude it was not worth the money. By December 1990, their cables described him as desperate. He started to barter with his handlers, only to be met with a threat that unless he could come up with something about his former colleagues in the JSO that might incriminate them in Lockerbie, he would be abandoned in Malta and cut off without a penny.
But the thing about this is, so when you read about for poor Jacker here, so he's come off the street, he's given this a go, but the CIA didn't seem to do any background checks. They were just like, aye, all right, which speaks to the relationship being more of a, we'll tell you what to say, and then you say it. Because you think that a very swift 1 week through vetting would reveal this guy's fucking useless, but for some reason that doesn't seem to have happened.
I suppose, well, I mean, one of the things, they had almost nobody on the inside in Libya secret services. So
This one guy walks in, oh thank God, fucking nothing's in the back office, here's all the secrets.
and in the days when everything wasn't computerized and it wasn't so easy, and I mean, something that Megrahi says. I've read this John Ashton Megrahi biography that's a really good read. Part of it is Megrahi telling his story, and part of it is John Ashton, an investigator, going through the forensic and legal evidence. And he's convinced that the timer fragment was just planted. He just thinks it's bollocks. But that, you know, everybody had a side hustle in Libya. You couldn't survive off a government salary. So everybody was doing something to a certain extent. The CIA wouldn't know exactly, wouldn't necessarily be able to check out exactly what he's doing. So in the first instance, this guy walks in and says he's an agent and he wants to work for them. Right, great, we'll put you on the payroll. But very quickly it becomes apparent that he's a
Because you can imagine that internal conversation where it's like the people on the ground are phoning up Langley going like, we've got a guy. Yeah, excellent. Is he vetted? Yeah. You can't phone up Langley and go, remember what I was telling you last week about this guy being the king's cousin? Yes. So yeah, that's all going to happen. You can see this is. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of botches happening one after the other on all sides of this.
That's history, baby.
Yeah, and it's and rather than just doing the noble thing, coming forward and just saying, yeah, it was all a bit of a clusterfuck. We had tons of cocaine on that plane. We had nothing to do with the bomb though, except the fact our guy made the bomb.
I don't know if it was cocaine or heroin.
Whatever, powder stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the only way the truth of this will ever come out is if someone at the CIA does a whistleblower, which, I mean, they would still all be alive. It's not that far in the past. It could feasibly happen that somebody would come forward and admits it was all a bunch of dodgy bullets.
I mean, there's a CIA guy called John Holt, who he's ex-CIA, who's scathing about all of this, and it's just like it's nonsense. And he's just, I mean, one of the documentaries, he's just kind of laughing at the FBI. He says, "Well, the FBI are just cops, and if you give them a lead, they'll go after it, and they'll, you know." It's the way he says, "Just cops." Like that's like such a, which is you can. Yeah, I can't imagine why you two teams wouldn't play nicely together. Do you know what I mean? If that's how you talk about each other, but.
Well, criminals always have a low estimation of cops.
I mean, I completely understand why, having unraveled this all themselves, they really want to believe it. But what I find really difficult to come to terms with is, like, so you know that fragment's not the same. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because maybe it was a prototype one and the Libyans had one of those. Right. So then it's not one of the ones that... So then you're discounting the testimony of Meister and Bollier, the guy from Mebo. So you're saying that he's lying. So if he's lying, how can we trust anything in regards to any of that? You know what I mean? And like that, and Bollier from Mebo was, he was working with the Stasi. He was definitely fucking working with the CIA to some extent, and he was fucking selling Western technology to Middle Eastern people that he knew were doing shady shit. He was playing everybody.
I think that because we're sort of being a bit light about this, and I am conscious I'm becoming a bit obsessed with this. It was meant to explode over the sea, but I think the tragic thing for the families involved in it is that if it had done that, the closure point would probably have been there and then, because with a aircraft going down over the Atlantic, you're probably never really going to find out for sure.
Well, I think it would have been considered that it was all, we never have gotten past it being around, because there probably wouldn't have been anywhere near as much debris to recover. Although that being said, if the same conclusions would have been jumped to, and I don't imagine for one second that the same concerns would have been held by the CIA about their potential to be implicated in that, and therefore I don't doubt a similar layer of breadcrumbs would have been thrown in another direction.
I think though that if it had happened not probably just off the coast, as in quite a way into it. I mean, the aircraft had gone down through non-bombing means that have just basically stalled and hit the floor. But I mean, on impact, it is like it's going to shred the whole thing. So I think that it would probably have gone down as an unsolved aviation accident. Potentially, I don't know if it would have been charged being a terrorist attack, unless, of course, and this is what Free was saying about, somebody having to come forward and go, that was us. But that's the thing, even after it happened, it doesn't seem like there's been a huge vocal claiming of, yep, that was us. By the way, we did this.
Certainly, like CIA cables internally are the sources in Syria, because the Syria and Iran regimes are really close. That they were like, no, that was us.
Okay.
And no nation state is actually going to come out and say, yeah, that we did that. They don't do that.
Yeah.
Terrorist groups do, but nation states don't.
I think for the family that it is not, even if it had happened over the sea or this, I just think the truth is never really going to come out. And I think that's like the worst part of it, because I don't know if you can ever find a closure moment for it. We were talking about this to with the Lockerbie podcast as well about it, at what point do you have to just sort of let this go? You know, and that's, I think, quite a difficult thing on some of the documentaries that I've watched throughout this, because it seems like a lot of the families have kind of processed it, moved on, but others
A lot
haven't.
of families are completely comfortable with the Megrahi conviction, and you know, and I can understand that. I can understand why, given the evidence that there was, you could conclude it. But given the evidence against it, I don't understand why anybody who is meant to investigate things for a living can't see the problems.
Even if you do accept that, case and you think McGrahy is guilty, there's still like dozens of people who got away scot-free, regardless of who did this. There was a whole team of guys who did this and will never be known about and got away with it.
I mean, I think what's so, I mean, having watched an interview with McGrahy when he was dying, he seems, and I mean, he was well liked in prison in Scotland, apparently, by the guards and things like that. By the time he was released, none of them thought he was guilty, or substantial number of them, at least. Like, they didn't think he was guilty. He was a nice, gentle guy, apparently. I mean, Jim Swire ended up friends with him and went over to Libya to see him as well. And I mean, this is a guy whose daughter was murdered in this atrocity. And I think he felt huge guilt in having been so involved in getting McGrahy to trial, because he completely believed this, and then saw the evidence fall apart in the courtroom in front of him, and came to the conclusion that it was all a work. And at that point, because I think he's an unbelievably honourable man, he couldn't let it go. He was not willing to be party to an injustice, because that injustice did not solve or remedy the injustice he had suffered. And ultimately, he just, I think he knows. Like, I mean, James Swire's got folders. I've got an entire bloody study. He's got so much, and he is convinced that the PT-35B fragment is a forgery, that it was probably planted, and that it was exactly what it always looked like, which was the Iranians paying a little terrorist cell to do to America what America had done to them: take down a jet, passenger jet of roughly equal size. Because I think I'm right in saying this. Not only did the Americans not apologize, I think they gave members of staff on the Vincennes medals, which is the sort of thing that would great, wouldn't it? Fuck yeah.
That's a new record for collateral damage.
You just think that's like, why? I can't imagine why you're not more popular over there, guys. They're so unreasonable. So
I mean, it's two instances back to back, because in this way they're not accepting the responsibility for the possible drug.
Jim Swire says that he just wants to know the truth. I think Jim Swire knows the truth. What he actually wants is to see for the people that did it to admit the truth.
Because to go back to the incident, I mean, if America had owned up to its mistake, which was basically one of our warships had shot down a civilian airliner in error because they didn't communicate using the correct frequency, it's potentially possible that none of this would have happened. And to Tree's point, the people that likely were all involved in it, and you're completely correct, there's no way it's one guy. It's going to be a team will done this. No justice was done there. And those individuals were terrorists capable of taking down an airliner, and they just roamed free, presumably, after this as well. So, I mean, the Americans, it's very difficult to, no matter which way you slice this, I think, based on the evidence, just say, yeah, that was all fine, guys, don't worry about it.
One further thing is that there was a potential link for the Maltese clothes as well to that terrorist cell. So I have, because I'm this good to you, listeners of this podcast, I have sat through the documentary The Maltese Double Cross. so you don't have to. Um, it's the parts of it are absolutely excellent, and parts of them feature a relatively young Brian Cox trying to channel his kind of Dylan Thomas with like bits of exposition on that are frankly embarrassing. But I have sat through that a couple of occasions, and in amongst that, there was some evidence that some of it was affiliated with the PFLPGC. Had been purchasing clothes in Malta to sell in Sweden. I think he was based in Sweden. I don't know why Maltese clothes wanted to be sold in Sweden, but it does seem like these guys would, like, one way that they made money was just like buying and selling stuff for a profit, kind of bellboys. And so there was a route for clothing made in Malta to have been in amongst that. But there was definitely something that had been bought in Tony Gauchi's shop in the case.
Yes.
So maybe Tony really does remember the guy coming in.
Mhm.
But it could have been at any point over a range of days. Because, fucking Paul.
I mean, it feels like in the big scheme of it, it's sort of been made into this incredibly consequential piece of evidence that's not really the big picture. It just feels like, no, the reason why that big picture is not coming into focus is because the CIA do not want that big picture to come into focus.
No.
So, it is what it is. But I just think it's a terrible situation for the relatives to be in. I think this is actually how the episode happened. We were talking about Lucy Letby
Yeah.
and the families there, and how there will be a diverse opinion there about, do we keep pursuing this? Do we let it go? Where's the closure point? And I think Lockerbie is exactly that. But in some ways even worse, because I think that there's probably a much higher chance of the facts of Lucy Letby's case coming out and actually that verdict being overturned. I think this late in the day, I'd be very, very surprised, because that is what it would take. It would take the CIA to come forward and admit what it was up to. And I don't think that's going to happen.
I think as well, like, I mean, everyone wants to know the truth of what happened, and it'd be good for the wrongdoers to be punished in some way, or at least be acknowledged. But at the end of the day, it doesn't like undo the thing itself. So
No.
you talk about closure, but it doesn't really come until you just have a self-realization of it, being an ending to the thing. So you need to just do that yourself. It's not like it come from the process of any of this stuff.
I understand that's what a lot of families have done.
They have done stuff, like the families, like there's I think it was a lot of the kids were from Syracuse University that died in the plane. So they've got like a system where 2 kids from Lockerbie go over and study over there every year. They get a scholarship, and there's like 30 or so kids get a scholarship fund at Syracuse every year. So they do things like that, and they do memorials and stuff like that. So that's how you do it to try and get over the situation. Knowing would be good, but it's not, in most cases like this, unusual deaths, you just never find out. That's just unfortunately how it is.
Yeah.
It's not how it is in Lockerbie all the time, but I mean, the amount of dodgy business in the world, things akin to this happen a lot. It exists in a world of, we're talking about the CIA, drug running potentially, and terrorism. There's so much stuff that we just don't see that has such a atrocious effect on everybody, but you'll never know the truth of it because of how that world operates. You're not meant to.
I mean, I do. I mean, we've taken the piss a little bit about Tony and fucking Paul, but I do actually think it is highly likely that Tony does remember, like, a person that is significant in this coming in. Because not only was there an item of clothing that was definitely from his shop in amongst these Maltese clothes, there was also the umbrella that had been purchased, an umbrella of the type that was sold in his shop. And you think about how many fucking hundreds of thousands of different umbrella manufacturers there must be, but it was the kind that was sold in his shop, was found with blast damage that had obviously been in or near the primary suitcase. So there is every chance that he really does remember something, but his account over the 20 or more interviews just keeps nudging until it arrives at him identifying a guy that's half a foot shorter than the one he originally
And he probably believes that because your memory of a thing is actually just your memory of your last memory of it.
Yeah.
So he's just remembering what he last believed was the truth.
He's also probably remembering the 2 million quid he got.
Yeah. Yeah. I think more broadly as well, like one thing you can take from all this is like, how did this start? What caused this? And it's violence. Violence begets violence. So if you want to learn anything from this kind of stuff, apart from all the intricacies of like how to go about finding the truth, it's like, don't start stuff you can't finish, basically.
Yeah.
What the Americans did to the Iranians is horrible, and we talk about like, oh, you know, the victims here and everything like that, but that is a blip in the story that isn't really emphasized.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's maybe when you look at it objectively, one of the worst things the U.S. military's like ever done. I mean, you blew a civilian airliner full of innocent people out of the sky,
Because you mistook it for a military plane
you know,
and didn't stop.
to do the checks.
You didn't think it possible that you were mistaken.
Yeah.
And that's like, for us, that's like one of the most significant things that happened in this country. Like, you think of like Piper Alpha, you think of Dunblane, and you think of Lockerbie. That's like the three big, major things over the last like 50 years.
Yeah.
But that, and like, there's some places in the world where that's just like a Tuesday now. That kind of death is like normality for people. So
But if it's not happening to people nearby and it's not happening to white people, then it doesn't count for some people.
Because this is what I'm saying about the wonder they didn't investigate this openly, fairly, and correctly, because their investigation was actually it's fine that you shot down a civilian airliner. So if you've got a group of people that are starting that they can do that, this is quite softball in comparison to just covering up a wee bit of drug running or whatever here by nudging evidence along. If you're going to give the captain of that ship a medal for his fuck up, then you're in a different whole way of being at that stage.